Today, on this episode of The Crossover, we will be discussing the landmark Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade with prominent constitutional law scholar and Penn State professor Larry Backer. Find out how this constitutional ruling that protects a pregnant woman's liberty to have an abortion is currently under fire, with significant societal implications at risk. Much more on this episode of The Crossover. Good afternoon, everyone. Going to be talking about Roe versus Wade today with constitutional law expert Larry Backer. Should be a good one. Hey, Larry, how you doing?
All right. Sorry this is such a pain.
No, it's all right. Listen, as long as you logged on, it should be a great topic. I'm going to do a brief introduction just while everyone's logging in. We have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Larry Backer today, a world-renowned constitutional law expert. He is currently a professor of law and international affairs at Penn State, where he focuses his research on governance-related issues. Currently teaches courses on corporate social responsibility, corporations, multinational enterprises, and constitutional law, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. He teaches all of these areas at the Penn State School of International Affairs. He's lectured on issues of transnational, corporate, and constitutional law all over the world, including Asia, Latin America, Europe, and Australia. He serves on the board of multiple journals, and he's also served as chair of the Penn State University Faculty Senate. He has multiple best-selling books, and he's published over 100 articles and book chapters all over the world. And here today to discuss the incredibly timely topic, which has everyone heated, basically Roe versus Wade. So again, Larry, really looking forward to talking to you today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let's see what we can do in the little bit of time. This is a very rich case.
Yeah, I was going to say this, as you said, this can take up an entire semester of law school, let alone a 30-minute interview. But let's just start with the very basics. What is Roe versus Wade? What was that decision?
All right. Yeah, the case was, the case was both easy and interesting, and you can't look at it in isolation. So in Roe, and this is after some litigation beforehand, what the Supreme Court did was invalidate limitations on abortion, on rights to abortion, not completely, but rights to abortion on the basis of its finding that there's a fundamental interest that women have in life and in the future, and the state can't interfere with the abortion decision unless there's a compelling reason to do it. So essentially what they did was they went into what we call substantive due process. That is, the 14th Amendment says the state can kill you, they can take your property, and they can imprison you, but only with due process. And what substantive due process does, just kind of very generally, is to say, well, there are some deprivations that are so bad that there's no process available by which you can deprive them. And that is the way in which we talk about fundamental rights. And so in that case, that's essentially what they did. They said, look, women have a fundamental right in autonomy. It's part of their liberty interest, life, liberty, and property. It's part of their liberty interest, and therefore the state can't muck around with it unless they have a vastly compelling interest. And at that point, they said, well, the vastly compelling interest is a function of what we call the viability of the fetus, and off to the races we went. And off to the races we did go, 70 years of litigation. The problem with Roe is that you have to be very careful. There's two things that are going on, and it works the same way as in the religion clauses. There's the idea of Roe protecting women's fundamental rights and liberty to terminate their pregnancy under certain very broad and ambiguous conditions, right? That idea. And then there's the jurisprudence of Roe, and that is what the courts wind up doing in the context of their decisions that cobble together something like that. And the reason that's important is that Roe was modified to some extent. We can't really talk about Roe, which is why in the Dobbs case we spend half of the opinion not talking about Roe, but talking about Casey, which is a 1992 decision in which the court said, yeah, we like the idea, right, of Roe, but the reasoning in Roe is making us a little crazy. We're kind of going to accept it because we spent a lot of time talking about stare decisis, but we're going to impose a new test, and that's the undue burden test. So when you look at Roe, you have to look at that's the right, but the way in which the Supreme Court deals with it when states begin to legislate, as they've been doing for the last 40 years, is they apply since 1992 this undue burden test. And depending on the composition of the court, burdens, my burden and your burdens may be very different. And off we went, right? And so that's what's been at issue. And in that context, what we have to look at this difference, in a sense, between the idea of Roe and the jurisprudence of Roe is this notion that, and actually academics had noted this certainly since like 1989, 1990, is that there's a between the right that we're looking at and the more technical issue of the extent to which states can legislate, right? And so they focused on number two, the extent to which state can legislate, and then kind of the other stuff just morphed into the general discussion that we've been having about rights.
So let me ask you a question, Larry. This has been part of the U.S. Constitution for almost a half century. Abortion is relatively common in the U.S. The last NPR survey said that 1 in 4 women at some point in their life will end a pregnancy in abortion. Why is this coming under fire now out of nowhere?
Well, it's not out of nowhere. This has been going on since the Roe decision came together, and it brings, like everything else in this country, it brings together a bunch of odd bedfellows. Yeah, you've got the folks in many majority religions that take a moral stance on this and that believe that the state ought to align with their moral values with respect to and what they conceive of as the relationship between a woman, her body, and a fetus or an unborn child or an embryo, whatever. That's now become just political dynamite, depending, the word you use, right? So you've got that. At the same time, right, you've had a number of people who viewed the court as being presumptuous in finding all kinds of rights that effectively prohibited states from doing what they're doing. And that went into a general discussion about federalism. And so a lot of people who might have been indifferent to Roe were much less indifferent to kind of clawing back power to states, right? And so you've got this thing going on since the 70s. And again, what became very interesting here is that they found very early in the 80s that it was very difficult to attack the right, but it was to abortion, but it was much, much, much easier to attack or to get at it from the perspective of state construction of the area around it. So medical qualifications, the conditions and construction of facilities for the delivery of abortion, parental rights, the extent to which states can set up doctor committees and the like. So that's where they started going in, and that has been going on, not out of the blue. That has been going on since the 70s, with this moral overlay, which has now finally, and that moral overlay kind of retreated in the 80s, 90s, beginning of the 2000s, boom, comes back with a passion as two things happen. One, there's a change in the political strength of the quote unquote right, whatever that means. But there's certainly people taking a moral position, and a number of them with very strong opinions get on the court. Right. And
so let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court structure, because I think a lot of people don't understand how it works, and if they do understand, they have issues with the way it works. So you've got 9 individuals with lifelong job security, essentially no accountability, meaning that they can't really be voted out for the most part. And these 9 people are pushing their moral agenda on the entire country. I mean, is this the best structure? Is there something different, or is this is as good as it gets? I mean, what do you think?
Oh, that's a really highly political take on it, and a very popular one now. But yes, fundamentally what you're saying is roughly right, except for maybe there's a lot of disputes about the judgment. Yeah, we have 9 people. Why do we have 9 people? Because we have tradition. And that's why every once in a while, starting with actually the Democrats under Roosevelt, The idea, well, we finally got to 9 in the 19th century, I believe. Roosevelt got very angry when he tried to shrink the scope of state rights, wanted to pack the court. Everyone reacted with horror, and it's come back every once in a while, depending on how aggrieved people are and how much they want to use the courts. But yeah, so it's 9 people, doesn't have to be 9. They have lifetime tenure, right? And they really, they are self regulating in the sense that they know what their duty is, and they really ought to act on it. And there's judicial disqualification, the technical stuff, but they're not all powerful in the sense that they're just a court. We can always amend the Constitution. We can always write around them. And as Ed Meese used to say back in Reagan's time, a case is a case. And one of the problems that we've had is since 1958, and in the context of race desegregation, is embracing, and this is very new since the 50s, the notion that when the court decides a case, they are effectively creating something that we are all bound to follow. Technically, the litigants are bound to follow it. And yes, it makes sense that, and the lower courts are bound to follow it. But the rest of us, the federal government, federal agencies, and the rest of us, to a lesser extent, can then act accordingly. And what would happen at that point is that someone would sue you on the basis of the decision, right? And so we have to be very careful there in thinking about just how powerful they are. There's been this narrative since the 50s of an all-powerful court. They're your mom, they're your dad, they know what's best, and what you have to do is, if you're successful enough, you get a nice set of facts, you can wind your way up to them, and great things happen. And for a lot of people, certainly in the 70s, 80s, and to some extent the beginning of this century, from the quote-unquote the libertarian, social, progressive, and the left, that has been the case, but also for the right as well in some areas.
So tell us a little bit, if Roe versus Wade gets overturned, and many experts think that it's only a matter of time, what are the impacts throughout the country? You know, people have heard the word trigger states that already have laws in place that immediately make it illegal. But in your opinion, what is the immediate impact? And is it right away? Is it over 6 months? Is it over a year? What are the impacts?
All right. It's short, medium, and long term. Short term, trigger states, you're going to have, and states where this is politically hot, you're going to have an attempt to immediately enforce. I wouldn't be surprised if we aren't already seeing that done or preparing to be done, and in anticipation of the opinion being formalized and delivered. So yeah, we're going to have that. There are a number of states that have statutes in the hopper, and we're going to see a lot of that in the middle, in the medium term, and also the other way too. A lot of states that may have been, you know, wishy-washy about it are going to make a decision one way or another, and then what you're going to have is the business of the provision of termination services, and that's where the issue is going to get very hot. So I think there's like between 25 and 30 states that are probably going to go limitation from extreme to moderate. And then there'll be the cluster, the rest of the states, maybe 20 states, 23 states, where you'll have from almost on demand to conditional. And we're going to divide. And at that point, the fun stuff starts.
Fun or just a total disaster?
Well, for lawyers, for lawyers, it's both fun and total disasters. I mean, I was sitting here before we got on the air, and I started listing the areas that this is like a domino effect, the areas of disruption in constitutional law, and not just with respect to this quote unquote right and its provision, but with respect to virtually everything. Dormant Commerce Clause, the right to advertise or to go into a state, bring people out, the ability of businesses to insure for that if the insurance is in state X, but the ban is in state Y. There's already, I can tell you, Missouri is contemplating a statute that would allow private citizens to sue anyone who performs an abortion, whether in Missouri or outside of Missouri, or facilitates the performance of abortion. At the same time, California has come out with a law for funding the cost of non-residents to travel to California to get an abortion, and are also considering a shield law. This is going to be very hot now. A shield law to protect those who help pregnant people who may be subject to a lawsuit in a banned state, to be able to sue the people who sued them in the banned state in California, get damages, which can then seize their assets. So you're going to have these dueling states. California's one. Connecticut is thinking about passing a law as well. I think it's just come in, to shield providers and anyone who travels to the state for an abortion, and those people who help. The constitutional right of travel is probably being implicated, but my favorite, I'm sorry, it's way too long, but this is my personal favorite, the free exercise clause of religion. And that is in states that now ban abortions. If a woman has a sincere and deeply held religious belief, and there is a belief in her right to terminate her pregnancy, it is not clear that state legislation can be applied to them. This is the conservative project, the glory, right? The great success of the conservative project, which was to really bring the religion clauses and free exercise on steroids. Well, now it may well be applied against abortion bans in those states. So that's going to blow up as well. So anyway,
it sounds like we're in for a real roller coaster. I mean, I've even heard rumors that women and doctors could be prosecuted with homicide for abortion, that it can be criminalized as a murder. That seems ludicrous, but I mean, is that possible?
Yeah, sure. It's possible. States have been known to do all kinds of really interesting things. And then what winds up happening is, of course, you have to challenge. And the reason for that is the interorum effect, right? What doctor is going to want to risk, right, being charged with murder? So you're in New York, and this, I mean, this is about at the extreme of ludicrousness. The state of Mississippi decides that any doctor who performs a termination on any Mississippi resident who travels there is guilty of murder when because they've done it with a Mississippi resident. And then the Attorney General of Mississippi will go to a New York doctor, will go to the courts in New York and say, the doctor who's practicing in Manhattan has now been charged with homicide in Mississippi and we want to extradite him.
I mean, my God, it just seems totally crazy, but I mean, obviously anything's possible. So the simple rationale, people are saying, well, people can just travel to another state. You can order abortion pills online. So you're saying it's not going to be that simple?
It's none of that stuff is going to be that simple. Can you order abortion pills online? That's going to be a constitutional question. Mississippi, let's say, I'm using Mississippi because that's the Dobbs case. Mississippi says, I'm going to prohibit it. You're going to have to fight it. And there goes the Dormant Commerce Clause and the ability of a state to impede commerce. Is this commerce or is this morality? Does Mississippi have the right? Is their interest strong enough to deal with this? Again, it goes to the courts. So at the end of the day, the courts wind up being precisely where the Dobbs court said they shouldn't be, which is to effectively have to decide all of these things all of the time. Right now, what about insurance provisions in New York that applies to a Mississippi woman? Can Mississippi forbid that insurance? Well, if it happens in New York and not in Mississippi, someone's going to duke it out. The right to travel, the free exercise clause, the battle of the states, and where do we go next? Because the next thing is Justice Alito sent this back to the states saying this is a moral issue. Blah, blah, blah. He didn't completely close the door to finding fundamental rights. And it may well be possible that what a future court will do is to say, well, look, Roe wasn't wrong in the sense of fundamental rights. They were just wrong in applying it to women. We may instead read the Constitution as providing a fundamental right for the protection of two cells when they come together and form an embryo.
God. On the same topic of how extreme this can get, I've even heard rumors of essentially being able to track people's phone, Google searches. If a woman is searching on Google abortion clinics, that triggers flags. She can be followed by, police or, other agencies. Is it that ludicrous where people will start tracking phone use were you in an abortion clinic illegally? The cops show up at your house and arrest you?
Everything is possible. The argument is, oh my goodness, you can't do this. We have privacy rights. But signing into some of these services, you may not have them. People may abuse their positions. People may decide that they want to trigger a court case by actually doing this, having the person who's now sued or arrested then have to defend, and then have the court say, oh yeah, well, that used to be the way it is now, but either you consented or something else, and we're going to change the law, right? And again, it's an in terrorem effect. A lot of times, threatening to do something will have a significant effect, especially on people who have a lot to lose, even if they wind up not doing it. But, we're talking about a whole other area. This is data security, privacy, surveillance. And the American public is of two minds. We were more than happy to some extent when we had a crisis, COVID, and certainly all over the world, this is the case. The Israelis did it, the Chinese did it, the Japanese did it, the Koreans did it, to put an app on your phone. The French now have it with, I have my little certificate, where you track, because you're worrying about contact and all of this, and they want to, and we have no problem with that. Well, once the technology's out and you can do it, and you've vested it either in a public or private agency to track, cat's out of the bag. The question then is, where are you going to draw the line? And now you've invited politics and litigation. So yeah, it's plausible. And depending on the politics and the ambitions of the people who are going to want to drive it and their risk profiles, sure.
Wow. And, there's obviously a lot of reasons why a woman would want an abortion. Personal preference, her health, health of the fetus, also rape and incest. Are all of these falling under the same category, which also seems ludicrous?
All of them are falling under the same general category. States can do what they want, but every state is going to be dealing with this differently. So on the 30 banned states, they're not all going to be uniform. There are going to be a number of states, and we kind of have a sense of who the usual suspects are going to try for global ban. We don't really care whether it was your dad who raped you, or anything else, whether the child is going to be born but die within 6 months because of a horrible condition that will bankrupt the hospital that's going to have to take care of this poor child. We don't care. Total ban. And then there'll be a bunch of other states. You're going to see a spectrum.
God. And then, the other thing is that many people believe that, even if Roe is overturned, women will still continue to have abortions, just in a much less safe manner. Do you agree? I mean, if a woman wants an abortion, it's going to be very hard to stop them. It's just a matter of making it safe and making it efficient.
I don't mean to laugh, because this is a horrible subject. The reason I'm laughing is Justice Alito spent a tremendous amount of ink on his new history and tradition test. And what he did in looking at the history and tradition test to justify getting rid of Roe was to say, well, what I'm going to look at is the history and tradition of lawmaking by men. Not a word in there that since the history of sex, I guess, between men and women, that women have done what women have had to do when women have had to do it. And in many cases, women have done this despite of, beyond the reach of, or without the knowledge of the men who tend to control their bodies. So to say, are women actually going to stop? The answer is, did they stop at any point during this magnificent description of history that Justice Alito refers us to, 300 or 400 years, over 10,000 years, 3,000 years? No. Of course they're going to do it. And of course, people are always going to find a way. We have novels in that, apparently they don't read novels. We have novels in the 19th century, very common for young girls to go on vacation, even in our lifetime. So no, women are going to have abortions if they can, if they need to, and women are going to rally, and sympathetic men are going to rally. Cost is going to be different. It's going to affect by class, by gender, by knowledge, right? Not by gender, by class, by knowledge, by race, ethnicity, and that'll sort itself out. But yeah, no, abortion's not going. Terminations are not going anywhere, and women will, as they had tend to drive this. And, and I'm actually quite sympathetic to that, given the nature of things. And men and women may try to invoke law, morality, or the like. But, our history as a human species with respect to this is very clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the major point, is that whether or not Roe is overturned, women are still going to get abortions. You're just making it a lot less safe. And that's the important thing. It's not like you're going to be stopping abortions. They're still happening, just not in a very safe manner. And you mentioned something about ethnicity. And I think that's a very important point, because abortions and poverties are higher in Blacks and Hispanics. So this court ruling is going to affect minorities to a higher extent. Is that true?
Yeah, it's going to affect anyone who's poor and anyone who doesn't have access to information or to NGOs who can help them are going to likely be disproportionately affected. This isn't news, and you're not going to need another PhD study to verify this. Everyone understood this before Roe. Everyone understands it during Roe. Everyone understands it after Roe. You can try to clean it up and throw it into a dustbin somewhere so that people actually don't look. But in a sense, that's the ironic commentary on Justice Alito's opinion, because in effect, he doesn't recognize this world existing. There's the world that he sees is a world of legislators, a world of commentators, a world of official pronouncements, but he never really gets into the realities of what's going on around him, and probably around him in ways that he personally may well be oblivious.
So let's say that if Roe is overturned, how would the U.S. compare with the rest of the world, other major industrialized countries?
In terms of the right to the ability of a woman to safely get a termination of pregnancy, irrespective of conditions.
Yeah,
Not
correct.
very, yeah.
Would we be falling behind other industrialized countries in the freedom of women to choose an abortion?
Oh, sure.
And what's the breakdown in terms of, if you were to say, do most industrialized countries allow legal abortions or not?
Many to most. And again, within a spectrum. Developing states tend to be less hospitable to the idea, but there, the unofficial economy, the unofficial social structures, which no one ever talks about, may moderate that effect. Most developed states, again within the spectrum, tend to permit terminations, even if it's relatively narrow. Germany used to be a problem. Ireland certainly was a problem. Eastern European states, states that have a heavily Catholic tradition, for example, tended to be a problem, but in terms of the provision, but not an entirely insurmountable one, in terms of, especially for women, maybe who didn't share the faith tradition. And that's actually an important point. When we talk about this, and we talk about the way in which we tend to regulate or approach this, we never really talk about how it's not really a matter of law, it's a matter of culture, collective organizations and the like. There's nothing that had ever prevented groups of people to try to convince women that this is a proper approach or this is the right moral stance, just like the opposite may well be true. And that remains the case all over the place. These laws, and one of the things that it becomes very confusing, most of these laws are not laws that mandate abortion. They're laws that permit a woman to decide on an abortion. And one of the incredibly effective narrative tropes that was developed from the 70s was to kind of sort of get the sense that effectively what the laws did was to sort of kind of create an abortion factory.
Now, what about, let's just move past Roe versus Wade. Many people think this is just the tip of the iceberg, that once this is overturned, many other progressive laws are also going to come under fire. One, do you agree? And two, if so, what other laws do you think will fall next?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, if you take him at his word, if you take the court, this purported majority at their words, yeah. The question now is what is left? What is left of substantive due process, and where are we? And where are we going to go next? Certainly, all the sex laws are grist for the mill. They spent a lot of time saying, "Oh, no, 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 abortion is very different from everything else, so don't worry about that." But they also then tell us, hey, precedent has really no value if they're wrong, because now what we're going to do is we're going to get things right. And they've given you the formula, the magic formula that you use to write an opinion to show that the other decision was wrong and this one's right. So, yeah, I think they're all, not now, but over the arc of the next 5 or 6 years, they all may be on they're certainly going to be challenged, but they're all on the table. Rights to contraception, even among married people, the old adultery and fornication laws. People, I sometimes mention adultery and fornication in class, and they say, "Oh, you're talking about a historical novel." They may be back on the table. Idaho, for example, periodically had tried to revive them. And of course, same-sex issues, both in terms, not just marriage, that's the cherry on top, but criminalizing or identifying and then criminalizing acts of a sexual nature that with respect to which the majority will come up with some basis for determining in, what was the term, history and traditions of ordered liberty don't exist. So yeah, they may all be on the chopping block. They may survive, but they're certainly going to be on the chopping block. But so is the federal administrative state. So is a lot of the constructions of a national market. This is all deeply interconnected, because in a sense, with Roe, you're pulling a yarn, but there's been a very tight interlinking of a lot of doctrines and precedent that has constructed what we now understand as the United States, its government, and its sense of itself. And if you pull it and you provide the formula for getting rid of it, or modifying it, transforming it radically, someone is going to take you up on the offer, or to use a different metaphor, you open the door, someone's going to push through.
God, it sounds like the country's taking about a 100-year step back in terms of progressive thought, and that's really unfortunate, because everyone's worked so. Hopefully not. You're right, but the fact that we're even discussing those issues is pretty scary.
Yeah.
Last question, because I know you're super busy. What are the political implications if Roe is overturned? Meaning for the next election, or really any government election, are people going to view Democrats and Republicans differently based off of the Roe versus Wade decision?
Maybe. This is going to be a hard one. This is going to be a hard one. Republican libertarians may be very different than devout religious Republicans. Devout religious Democrats may be different than critical theory Democrats. I won't use the term woke. But it's not clear. I think what is clear is that state politics, again, is going to become much more important site for a lot of political action. I think that this is going to energize the NGO communities and businesses again. Businesses reluctantly, but they're going to be pulled into this, especially with respect to their benefits. NGOs are just, if they have half a brain, are on any side of this thing, are really going to blossom. And it's not clear. I was actually thinking about this a little bit and trying to figure out, well, who might benefit for the critical November midterms. Everyone is kind of focused on that, and it was dicey to begin with. It's not clear. One possibility, and I'm tending towards this, it'll have no net effect, in the sense that it merely confirms what people had thought of. And there'll be some people on the fence on either side that may shift, but in terms of big shifts, maybe less. But we got to view this in terms of going on. So you're going to view this with the border issue, with the China issue, with the can I get baby formula issue, and then we'll see what the mix is. It's not going to be Roe or nothing. this is going to be a very complicated election. It's added another piece, but there is a lot of stuff out there right now.
Crazy times. Larry, I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
And it's the $1 million question. One, in your opinion, will Roe versus Wade be overturned? And two, when is that decision coming?
I would bet 60 to 70, 40, 30 that it is going to be overturned. And I suspect that they may wait, maybe another 2-3 weeks. Usually the blockbuster opinions come out at the end of June. It's just been the tradition, but what tradition are there? And given the leak has been, and we didn't have a chance to talk about that, but yeah, the leak has been an extraordinary boulder thrown at the window, which is the Supreme Court. So, that's shaping this a little bit. I think what they may want to do is try to find the leaker before they actually do it. And they may delay only because I think the 4 dissents, there's likely going to be a joint dissent, and then there's going to be 4 additional dissents. They're going to be even longer than, and probably much, much less nice than the magisterial majority. And then I also bet that they need time because a number of people who wanted to push in a bunch of much more radical directions on the winning side of Dobbs are also going to want to have their say. So it's going to be the opinion, 5-4, and then there's likely to be another 6 or 7 opinions, and then it's going to be crazy time.
Wow. Well, listen, Larry, thank you so much for your time today. Obviously, crazy times in the USA. Everything is so extreme with, everything that you've come to know and kind of expect to be stable, everything just kind of moving beneath your feet. So let's see how it turns out. I hope you're wrong about your prediction about Roe versus Wade, but I think your prediction is based on facts and mine is more just about my personal preference. So let's see. It's crazy times. I really appreciate you, all the time that you've spent with us, and we'll be talking soon. Again, thanks for all your expertise.
Well, and thank you. And this is a great podcast site. Thank you for all your efforts. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Awesome, Larry. Have a great day.
All right. You
appreciate
too.
it. Take care, bud.
Bye.